Is it now time to cut to the chase and just say, look, bring on the 2-week lockdown? Let's speak with Harriet Harman, former deputy leader of the Labour Party, current MP for Camberwell and Peckham. Harriet Harman, afternoon to you. I would imagine, I don't want to second guess what you're going to tell me, but you'd be supportive of your current leader's position on this, a 2-week lockdown.
Well, yes, I would. And because he's based his view on the minutes of the meeting of SAGE, the government's scientific experts, and indeed what was said by the chief medical officer, who said even moving up to tier 3, i.e. the highest of these 3-tier levels in Liverpool, is not of itself going to be enough. So I think we can see by the numbers, which are very alarming, that we need to get ahead of this rather than dither and wait behind it. But it also needs to come with proper compensation and financial support for businesses, for individuals who are self-employed, and for councils who are providing services. And, you know, at a time like this, the government should recognise that it needs to do what only government can do, is back people up. So it needs to do the firm measures to stop the virus spreading, but the very supportive measures to stop the economy collapsing in such a way that then destitution and all the other problems that come with low income and poverty, they then take their toll as well.
Isn't one of the problems that we know the government is in a mess on this, and Matt Hancock is, you know, perhaps losing the room, maybe lost it a few weeks ago, according to some, in terms of being in control of this particular brief. And you know, we know it's huge, we know it's unprecedented, it's very difficult. But aren't your own party in a very similar position? You know, we had Andy Burnham saying we don't want tier 3 in Manchester. This would be terrible. But of course, that goes very much against what's happened with your leader, who says we do need a national lockdown. And then somebody throws a brown envelope in his direction and suddenly tier 3 is okay.
Well, except that what he's saying is it's unfair to try and to move up to tier 3 with all the businesses that are going to suffer in that way without central government providing the compensation to people who are going to be affected. And I think the idea that somehow he's holding out for a bribe, I mean, the money is not going to him. The money is going to,
well, of course,
businesses that are going to be affected. It's going to be going to freelancers, and he's trying to point out the problem. And also the worry is that even with tier 3, those restrictions are not enough to do the job. Ultimately, it's got to break the advance. And I mean, you've just quoted on your news those figures going up 10,000 from 17,000 infections to 27,000. And we know that that then moves into hospitalisation, and we know that then feeds into death figures. So we absolutely do have to get ahead of this, but have the financial compensation. And I think all approach it with a bit of, you know, moral humility. Nobody has faced a pandemic like this, either people in government or people in local government or anybody of us in the public. And it's a very difficult and bewildering time. But I think the government would do better if they would do more local coordination. For example, instead of thinking they can do test, track and trace just by pulling one big lever in central government, that they should use the track and tracing in local government and draw on the embeddedness of local authorities within their local communities. They've got their public health directors, who we've been seeing on the television now, who are immensely professional network of people. Use them for the government not to think that they can do it all centrally. Clearly they can't, and that will build goodwill as well as drawing in expertise that is sorely needed.
Do you think, I mean, you've been around the political bloc for some, I say that kindly, by the way, Harriet, for some years. You know how these things work and the machinery of government. I mean, do you sense that as these local lockdowns, I appreciate that the Prime Minister differs slightly from Keir Starmer, but it's likely to amount to the same thing. This time next week, we could all be in tier 3. That certainly appears to be the direction of travel. Do you seriously think, though, that 2 weeks, they're going to suddenly say, that's it, done 2 weeks, all back to normal again? This is another long haul, isn't it?
Well, I think that the idea is that you interrupt the spread of the virus. And I saw it reported that some were suggesting that every time there's school holidays, there should be some sort of attempt to do circuit breaking.
Yeah, I saw that.
What we're trying to do is delay things so that the NHS doesn't get overwhelmed, but also until we move nearer the vaccine, but also to sort out the testing system, which is still not working as it should be, and to build a proper track and tracing system. So time matters here. But one of the things, and you said rightly, I've been in an MP for 3 decades and have seen many prime ministers. And, I've seen the global financial crisis and all sorts of crises, none truly just as bad as this. But I do think that there is something about the way that Boris Johnson is leading on this, which is building a lack of confidence and a lack of trust. He just doesn't seem to be really getting a complete grip on it at the earliest moment. I mean, I was quite surprised when he went on holiday, for heaven's sake. I mean, I could never have seen Gordon Brown going on holiday when the economy was creaking and when the NHS was threatened with overload and waiting list growing and the virus growing. I mean, at the end of the day, if you take on being prime minister, you've got to lead the country and you've got to lead all your ministers and you've got to give people confidence. And I think that he needs to step up a bit and recognise that obviously when he became prime minister, he didn't expect this to happen. It might not be what he put in for, but he took on the job of prime minister and he's got to, step up, I think, and take more of a grip on it.
In fairness, he had 4 days in a tent, didn't he? I think he wasn't laying in a hammock in Barbados, but
it doesn't matter. He should be at the, he should be at the wheel of the ship. In 4 days, all sorts of things can happen. And I'm sorry, he can have a holiday once we're all vaccinated. And it might sound a bit harsh, but if you step up to take up the role of prime minister, everybody else is struggling on a day-to-day basis. I think the idea that he went off on holiday, I mean, that's just emblematic of what I see anyway. There's
some people might say that somebody who was still getting over COVID should maybe take a few days off, and perhaps that was his thinking.
Well, if he was not capable of doing the job, then he shouldn't be doing the job at all. He should be handing it over to somebody else. This is a point where we need a fully operational
4 days. 4 days in a tent, Harriet. Come on. Well, I know we're on a different subject here, but come on, 4 days in a tent. You don't decry him that, do you? Newborn little baby. It was a lovely scene.
Well, I call me harsh or old-fashioned, but I think that if you take on the role of prime minister in the middle, and you're in the middle of a crisis, but it's not just the issue of the holiday. I think the holiday is symptomatic, is that there's a system called COBRA, which is the government's emergency provisions, where the government gets all the key ministers together with the key advisors and the top scientists and civil servants and business people and local government. And he's not been chairing those. He's leaving Matt Hancock, the health secretary, to chair them, or Rishi Sunak, the chancellor, to chair them. Now, when we had the global financial crisis, we had weekly and sometimes daily meetings chaired by Gordon Brown. And he would say, right, what is the information? He wanted all the information up to date in real time and who's going to do what. And they need to do it immediately. And we will check out what's being done tomorrow. And I don't see that sort of machinery working at the moment. And I think it would be better if it was working. But having said that, I don't think this is easy for anybody, this crisis. And, it wasn't the fault of Boris Johnson that coronavirus happened. So I just say it by way of a suggestion rather than a criticism. And
all right, just in the interest of balance, we should say Gordon Brown was kicked out of office after about 10 minutes, wasn't he, sir?
Yeah, he indeed he was. It was at the end of a period of Labour government, and he was blamed for the global financial crisis. Indeed, although, as the name suggests, global, it wasn't his fault that he caused it. So, but this is not about.
Was the Chancellor for 11 years, though, wasn't he?
No, yeah, but this is not about who's going to get the blame and who's going to win elections afterwards. This is about what should be done now in order to save lives and protect the economy. At the end of the day, we all want the Prime Minister and the government to be the very best it can be. Because all of us, all of our families, all of our neighbourhoods, all of our areas are profoundly affected by this.
Of course.
So we have to put aside the issue of, whether it's how it's playing out politically. The point is for it to be working well as it can be.
Do you think? I mean, it's one of the problems, Harriet Harman. Just a final point, and a lot of people are saying, look, we've lost trust in politicians. I know that if you went back to the 1960s or 70s or whatever, I'm sure people were saying the same things. It's a fairly common mantra in a democracy, maybe not a bad thing. But, this idea of putting politics aside and moving on with things, You guys aren't really capable of it, are you? I mean, with respect, you've just done a number there on Boris Johnson having his little camping trip, and you mentioned Gordon Brown in there. It's just part of your political instincts. Whenever you're in front of a microphone or a camera, you happen to be on both at the moment. You go for the jugular when it comes to the opposition. You can't help yourselves.
Well, except that this is not normal times, and I think that what the Prime Minister should have done is, he could have actually created a cross-party cabinet in a national emergency to bind everybody in and to hear from everybody. He could have done more consultation with local government, and he could have done less overclaiming, because prancing into Parliament and saying we're going to be world beating at testing and we're going to be world beating at tracking. I mean, if you overclaim and then you can't deliver, it undermines confidence. And, I genuinely and sincerely want the Prime Minister and his whole government to be absolutely unbelievably good in this situation. Nobody should have an interest in them messing things up. And I'm just suggesting what he can still be doing in the future. I mean, he can still be doing what some other countries have done, which have said this is a national emergency. We're going to have a nationally based cross-party government, and we're going to really use our local leaders, and we're going to not overclaim, because this is damn hard.
Harriet Harman, thank you. Former Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, currently, of course, MP for Camberwell and Peckham. She's been over there for 30 years down there in Westminster. She knows her territory. But again, the moment that goal is offered as, do you want to give the opposition a little bit of a kicking? In she went, came straight down the back there, past the 1,000-yard mark, couldn't resist it, wallop, straight up the bracket to Johnson. It just goes with the territory, doesn't it, when you do that for a living?